European Medicines Agency in Amsterdam to this press briefing today. Our safety committee, the PRAC, concluded its review of the rare cases of blood clots in people who received the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine and that have been observed in many EU member states. During this press briefing, we will inform you about the outcome of the discussion by the PRAC and details of the assessment. My name is Maria-Agnes Heine, and I'm the head of EMA's Communication Department. I'm very delighted to have with me today Mrs. EMA Cook, the Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency, Dr. Sabine Strauss, the Chair of EMA's Safety Committee, the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, PRAC, and Dr. Peter Arlett, the Head of Analytics at EMA, who can provide additional information about the review and the scientific evidence it was based on. Before we start, I want to explain how we plan to run this press briefing. So please note that your microphone is disabled by default for the duration of the press briefing. We will first hear short remarks of Mrs. Cook and Dr. Strauss, and after that we will have half an hour for questions. Once the question and answer session starts, please raise your hand in WebEx if you want to raise a question. Today's briefing is broadcast via YouTube and Europe by satellite. The footage can be used free of charge by all media, and you will find the respective links in the invite sent earlier today. Without further delay, I'm now handing over to Mrs. EMA Cook, the Executive Director of EMA. Mrs. Cook, please.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Heine. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us again for this press briefing. First of all, I want to start by stating that our Safety Committee, the Pharmacovigilance and Risk Assessment Committee of the European Medicines Agency, has confirmed that the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine in preventing COVID-19 overall outweigh the risks of side effects. COVID-19 is a very serious disease with high hospitalization and death rates, and every day COVID is still causing thousands of deaths across the EU. This vaccine has proven to be highly effective. It prevents severe disease and hospitalization, and it is saving lives. Vaccination is extremely important in helping us in the fight against COVID-19, and we need to use the vaccines we have to protect us from the devastating effects. The PRAG, after a very in-depth analysis, has concluded that the reported cases of unusual blood clotting following vaccination with the AstraZeneca vaccine should be listed as possible side effects of the vaccine. As we communicated last week, we convened an ad hoc expert group composed of experts from a range of medical specialities, including hematologists, neurologists, epidemiologists, and virologists. Based on the current available evidence, specific risk factors such as age, gender, or previous medical history of clotting disorders have not been able to be confirmed, as the rare events are seen in all ages and in men and women. A plausible explanation for these rare side events is an immune response to the vaccine, leading to a condition similar to one seen sometimes in patients treated with heparin. It's called heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. And Dr. Strauss will give us more details from the assessment. EMA is working very closely with the national competent authorities in all the EU member states and the company to make sure that these risks are proactively communicated to healthcare professionals. It's important that both vaccinated people and healthcare professionals are aware of the signs and symptoms of these unusual blood clotting disorders so that they can be spotted quickly to minimise any possible risks. We will continue to monitor the scientific evidence available on both effectiveness and safety of all the authorised COVID-19 vaccines, and we will issue further recommendations if necessary on the grounds of science and robust evidence. This case clearly demonstrates one of the challenges posed by large-scale vaccination campaigns. When millions of people receive these vaccines, very rare events can occur that were not identified during the clinical trials. The role of pharmacovigilance, the monitoring of these side effects, is to help us to rapidly detect and analyse these risks and their impact on the benefit-risk profile of the vaccine. This case also shows us that our pharmacovigilance system is working. These very rare and unusual events have been picked up, identified, analysed, and have allowed us to come to science-based recommendations to allow the safe and effective use of this vaccine. EMA's scientific assessment will continue to work on all recommendations around this vaccine. Any national decision on the optimal use in vaccination campaigns will also take into account the pandemic situation in any individual country and other factors such as hospitalisation and availability of vaccines. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm now very pleased to hand over to the Chair of our Pharmacovigilance and Risk Assessment Committee, Dr. Sabina Strauss.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cook, and good afternoon. Over the past few weeks, the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, PRAC, that I chair, has analysed reports of blood clots in people who received the COVID-19 vaccine, AstraZeneca. As Ms. Cook said, the PRAC has confirmed that overall, the benefits of the vaccine from AstraZeneca in preventing COVID-19 are well established and the risks are very rare. The PRAC has conducted a very thorough review of the reports of rare and unusual blood clotting events in combination with low blood platelets, with the help of an ad hoc expert group that looked at the data in great detail. The committee has carried out a detailed review of the 62 cases of cerebral venous sinus thrombosis and 24 cases of splanchnic vein thrombosis in the European Union Drug Safety Database, EUDAVIGILANCE, as of March 22, and 18 of these cases were fatal. The cases came mainly from reporting systems of the European Economic Area and the UK. I can provide you also with more recent figures. As of April 4, 2021, the EU Drug Safety Database had received a total of 169 cases of CVST and 53 of splanchnic vein thrombosis. And at that moment, 34 million people were vaccinated in the European Economic Area and the UK. The more recent data did not change any of the PRAC recommendations. After extensive discussions within the committee and taking into account the findings of the expert group, our conclusion is that these clotting disorders are very rare side effects of the vaccine. This conclusion is based on the detailed clinical, mechanistic and epidemiological assessment, including a distinct clinical pattern, immunological findings and observation of more reported cases than would be expected from the background rates of these unusual conditions. The currently available data did not allow us to identify a definite cause for these complications. However, plausible explanations have been put forward, including an immune response that leads to a condition that seems similar to an atypical heparin-induced thrombocytopenia hit. No specific risk factors could be identified based on the current data. The committee can therefore not recommend any specific measures to reduce the risk. Most of the cases occurred in individuals below 60 years of age and in women, but because of the different ways the vaccine is being used in the different countries, the committee did not conclude that age and gender were clear risk factors for these very rare side effects. Importantly, further research analysis of this important issue will take place. The manufacturer, AstraZeneca, will have to conduct studies and research has been commissioned by EMA to further investigate these reactions. The committee will continue to assess all evidence that becomes available on this issue while the vaccination campaigns continue. It is of great importance that healthcare professionals and people coming for vaccination are aware of these risks and look out for possible signs or symptoms that usually occur in the first 2 weeks following vaccination. These include, for example, shortness of breath, chest pain, swelling in the leg, persistent abdominal pain, neurological symptoms including severe or persistent headache or blurred vision, and skin bruising beyond the site of injection. The product information will be updated to reflect these new findings this will be added as an adverse drug reaction to the product information, and it will also include warnings. I would like to thank all the colleagues that have worked very, very hard around the clock to provide a comprehensive review of all the evidence that was available to the committee, and for the assessment, which was both rapid and robust. The collaboration between the colleagues from the national competent authorities and the European Medicines Agency, as well as with the scientific expert, was extremely productive. This review shows that in Europe there is a strong pharmacovigilance system that can promptly detect and analyse any adverse event, even the very rare ones, and take appropriate action. And I would like to take the opportunity here to stress again the importance of reporting of any suspected side effects. It is based on the reports from healthcare professionals and from people vaccinated that we have been able to detect, assess and act in this rapid, robust way. I'm pleased to leave the floor now to our moderator.
Many thanks, Dr. Strauss and Mrs. Cook. We are now opening the floor for questions. So if you want to ask a question, please click on the raise hand icon, which appears when you move your mouse over your name in the participant list in WebEx. And when I give you the floor, you please unmute yourself and turn on the camera. So the first question today comes from Gillian Deutsch from Politico. Gillian, please.
Hi, thank you very much for the time. I have 2 questions, if you allow me. My first question is, you said that there's no specific indication that there is a specific gender or age more at risk of these rare blood clotting events. But I have to say, I'm a young woman. I'm 27 years old. I'm seeing plenty of reports of young women with serious, sometimes fatal blood clots. And there are plenty more women like me in Europe. I'm wondering if you can explain to me why I and other young women like me should confidently receive the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine if it is offered to me. The second question I want to ask is that Europe remains one of the most vaccine skeptic continents in the world. Will allowing a vaccine that does increase the risk of potentially fatal blood clots, even if very rare, if we allow that to remain on the market, will that have an increasingly negative effect on vaccine confidence in the continent? Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. And probably we split this message, so perhaps Dr. Strauss can first respond to the advice to young women, and then we can go forward with Mrs. Cook about the vaccine hesitancy.
Thank you very much. It's an important question and also a very difficult one. What we have seen so far is that indeed the risk seems to be predominantly in younger age, 60 years and younger, but it also occurs in the elderly, and we have seen that it predominantly affects women. Some of that could be explained by the way that the vaccine is being used in the European Union and the European Economic Area. What we do know is that COVID-19 is a very serious disease, and we know that the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine have been established. It prevents COVID disease, it prevents hospitalization, and it prevents mortality. So in that respect, PROC feels that the overall benefits outweigh the risks.
Mrs. Cook, can you perhaps go on?
Yes, I think it's very important that we use the vaccines that we have available to us. We need to beat this pandemic. We need to make sure that people have confidence in the vaccines. These are very rare side effects. the risk of mortality from COVID is much greater than the risk of mortality from these side effects. I think it's important that we give the message that vaccines will help us in the fight against COVID, and we need to continue to use these vaccines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Natasha Footy from Euractiv. Natasha, please.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, great. Thank you very much. Just following on from Gillian's question regarding young women. So I appreciate that it's not been enough to say that this is a risk factor, but when there are other vaccines available in countries, wouldn't it be prudent, in the EMA's opinion, for maybe countries to prioritize other vaccines over the AstraZeneca vaccine for young women, if that option is available, in the meantime, while we're waiting for more studies to be done? And my other question is, there's currently reports that countries that might look to mix the vaccines. For example, in the UK, they've done the first dose of a lot of AstraZeneca vaccines and may then look to mix with another vaccine for the second dose. Is there already guidelines from the EMA on this? Is this safe? And is this most importantly, and also importantly, is this effective as a strategy? Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. The first question is going to be responded to by Dr. Strauss, and the second one I'm going to give to Dr. Arlett.
Thank you for the question. I think it's also a very relevant question and a difficult one to answer. Well, not so difficult from our perspective. What we have done is we have very, very carefully assessed all the data that were available to us. We discussed these with experts in the field, and we have concluded that there is indeed a possibility of a very rare event that might occur. And what we have tried to do is to provide the information that we have available to the best of our knowledge and to add that to the product information. Based on that information, I think we have benefits that have been assessed in the clinical trials that show that AstraZeneca is effective in preventing COVID disease and its further consequences. And we have added a very carefully analyzed risk that is very, very rare. The frequency is difficult to assess yet, but we feel that if you state that the reporting rate is approximately 1 in 100,000 or even a little bit higher, that would reflect the risk. And based on that information, we ask national vaccination authorities, they can make up their minds on who they would like to vaccinate with which kind of vaccine. So that's the first part of your question, I think.
Thanks, Dr. Strauss. Dr. Arlett, can you perhaps talk about the guidelines?
Thanks very much indeed. Yes, EMA hasn't issued guidelines as such relating to mixing and matching different vaccines between the first and second dose. There's a lot of discussion on this, and I think that's being driven particularly by the need to optimise the use of relatively limited availability of the different vaccines that have been authorised. There is theoretical reason to think that mixing vaccines could work and could be a safe and effective approach. However, no data has been submitted to the European Medicines Agency, and we haven't made an assessment, therefore, of these specific vaccines for COVID-19. If such data becomes available, we will, of course, immediately assess it and issue any statements as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for those who missed the name, it's Dr. Peter Arlett, who is the head of analytics at the EMA. Okay, the next question is going to come from Laura Kostan from the German ARD. Lauren, please. We cannot hear you. Do you speak? If not, I'm going to the next person first, and we can take Laura later. Then I'm going to call Gerardo D'Amico from Rai TV. Gerardo?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hello, thank you for the opportunity. I would like to know if the statistical excess of cerebral thrombosis has been rigorously demonstrated and which on populations. And then, if possible, I would like to know the opinion of the agency on replacing the second dose of vaccine, for example, AstraZeneca, with another preparation, for example, Pfizer. I would like to know if this makes immunological sense for you, but also if you think it is ethical, since it is a practice beyond any experimentation carried on. Thank you.
Many thanks. Dr. Strauss, please.
I think as for the mixing and matching of vaccines, Dr. Peter Arlett already provided the information that we don't have data available to make a recommendation, but we're looking forward to receiving those data. And as for the second dose, what we do know about the cases of CVST is that they have occurred up until now after the first dose. But that might also be due to the fact that we don't have as much information available on the second dose, because people are getting their second dose as about now, and even further on in the future they will receive a second dose. So for the moment we can only provide the information that we have the cases of CVST after the first dose.
Thank you very much. So next is Yannis Palaiologos from Katemerini. Yannis, please.
Hi there. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Great. I wanted to ask, you say that no risk factors have been identified, but that most cases are women under the age of 60. Does that mean that people older than 60, older than 65 should feel that they are less at risk than even the 1 in 100,000, or is that not the case? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Dr. Strauss, please.
Thank you. That's a very fair question. But at the moment, it's very difficult to say anything. Like I explained, is that the exposure to the vaccine is different in the different member states. It's different between, for example, the European Economic Area and the UK. So it's partly, it might be due to the fact that more women have been vaccinated. We know that in the different member states, approximately 60% of all vaccinees is female, but it might also be due to a certain other factors that we have not been able to identify yet.
Thanks, Dr. Strauss. I'm now taking the question of Laura Costan, who has put it in the chat. So she is asking, you mentioned no common factors were identified among the cases. Why is that? Are the data evaluated not specific enough, or not enough cases reported yet in order to identify common aspects? Another question for you, Dr. Strauss.
Thank you. I think that the cases that we have evaluated, the 62, together with the expert group, those cases were provided quite good and extensive information, but nevertheless, the number is very limited. On the one hand, that's of course very good and fortunate that the number of cases is limited. At the same time, that also makes it very difficult to find common factors. And on the other hand, what we also know is of a lot of cases that are spontaneously reported, they are not as complete as we would like to have them in order to further analyze them. And so I would like to repeat again my kind request for people who suspect that they might have a side effect. Please report it, and report it as extensively and as complete as possible.
Thank you very much. So the next journalist to ask a question is Roland Termote from The Standard. Roland, please.
Hi, can you Yeah, okay. Well, my question is just to be very clear. You've stated that the benefits of the vaccine outweigh the risks, and the risk of mortality from COVID is much greater than the risk of mortality from these rare side effects of the vaccine. But does this still hold true when we only consider this specific group of, let's say, women under 60? Does the risk of mortality or severe side effects for this particular group, only within this particular group, does the risk of severe side effects or mortality from COVID-19 outweigh the risk associated with the vaccine for this very specific group?
Dr. Strauss, please.
Thank you. At the moment, that's something that's very difficult to answer because the clinical trials have not been performed age-specific. Well, they have been performed, but we do not have all the age-stratified data available. It's something that is part of our further research and further investigation concerning this vaccine. But we do know that the risk is very low. Sorry.
Thanks, Dr. Strauss. The next question is coming from Naomi Kreske from Bloomberg. Naomi, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hi,
now we can hear you. Yeah.
Hi, great. I'm just wondering whether your assessment on this vaccine would be different if other vaccines for COVID were more broadly available in Europe. And if you could also give us an example for another drug or vaccine that's broadly given for healthy people that might have a similar risk or a similar side effect, just so that we can sort of tell our readers what this might be similar to. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I give that question to Dr. Arlett.
So the important thing to remember is to go back to basics in terms of benefit risk. So as has been mentioned, COVID is causing many thousands of deaths every day across the EU. We have a number of vaccines authorised in the European Union, all of which have demonstrated effectiveness at preventing severe disease, and they are preventing deaths. In the case of the AstraZeneca vaccine, we have now identified a very rare side effect. And if we then put that into the context of the overall benefits of the vaccine, then the benefits outweigh the risks. Now, how vaccines are used and deployed by different member states, of course, is going to be impacted by the availability of vaccines, by the local infection rates, by hospital capacity, by who's already been vaccinated, and these decisions will be driven by all of those factors put together. The last question, Mary-Agnes, can you remind me, please? An example to compare to, yes, indeed. So perhaps an example that you might like to reflect on would be the use of the combined oral contraceptive, combined hormonal contraceptive, and blood clots that occur with contraceptives. Now, these are given to women who are normally otherwise healthy, although obviously in a big population, some of those women will have other risk factors and other conditions. And if we treat 10,000 women with combined hormonal contraceptive for a year, we'll see 4 excess blood clots in that year. So that just gives a benchmark of another medicine given to a healthy population, which causes a side effect, which occurs rarely, but that we need to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Donato Mancini from the Financial Times. Donato, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Thanks so much. I'm just following up on Jillian and Natasha from earlier. Is it possible you might be recommending another vaccine is used in certain age groups further down the line when you get more data? I mean, you might be aware of the fact that the UK is advising another shot is used in 18 to 29-year-olds. And aren't you concerned that Europeans will be very confused by the fact that there's no EU-wide guidance, but, there are limitations in place? The other question that I had is, what studies exactly have you asked AstraZeneca to carry out? And the last one, sorry, is there any indication this might be a vaccine at hand? And if so, could this be an issue for J&J, and are you closely reviewing that? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. 3 questions in one. So I think different people are going to respond to different questions. So I start with Mrs. Cook.
Sorry. So the question as to the recommendations in different populations, yes, of course, once we have if we have additional information, we will review it in the context of the populations, and we're working very closely with the UK Medicines and Health Regulatory Authority, who have also seen, who have vaccinated, who are in the process of reviewing a lot of outputs of the vaccinations strategy. We will take that into account in any further review. With respect to the it's always a very difficult situation, and the situation evolves as, 1, we have more information available, 2, as more vaccines are available, and 3, as different risk groups are identified and the general vaccination across the population changes. So we can expect that there will be new information and new recommendations as time goes on.
Thanks, Mrs. Cook. I now hand over to Dr. Strauss.
Thank you. To add to that, I think what we have done is we have, this is not unexpected. We know that we are rolling out vaccines in a very large scale, very many healthy people. And the difficulty is we'll see events occurring, some of them just by chance, temporarily associated, and some like this one that might be indeed an adverse effect from the vaccine. What we try is to take every piece of evidence, very carefully assess that, and then provide information via the product information and the patient leaflet, so that everybody is aware of what are the risks of a vaccine, what are the benefits of the vaccines. And then, of course, like it was highlighted, national authorities take decisions based on the status in their member state, the infection rate, the pandemic situation, and the availability of other vaccines. But what we try to do, and hopefully we are good at that and we will succeed in that, is to provide all the information that's available on both the benefits and the risks for the different vaccines.
Do you want to add something? Oh, no, Dr. Arlett, you can add perhaps on the studies that AZ has to carry out now.
Happy to comment on that. Yes, the PRAC has or will be imposing on AstraZeneca, the manufacturer, a number to ensure that we get robust data to evaluate this safety issue. Firstly, the company will need to do mechanistic studies, so laboratory studies, to try and better understand the effect of the vaccine with the clotting system. Secondly, the company will need to look at their existing data from closed clinical trials to see if that can give any further information on possible mechanism, risk factors, and so on. Thirdly, ongoing clinical trials, there should be consideration of how further data can be collected so that we can learn from them. And the company should also conduct epidemiological studies. I think maybe it's important to say that we are not relying just on the company, we are complementing that. And at a European level, the European Medicines Agency is supporting studies to be conducted by 2 large academic consortia, one led by the University of Erasmus in Rotterdam, the other by Utrecht University, which will be looking particularly at normal healthcare data, looking at risk factors for thrombosis with COVID disease and comparing those that are vaccinated with those that aren't vaccinated. And we would anticipate results starting to come in from those over the next couple of months. Thank you.
The next question comes from Maria Cheng from the Press. Maria, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Hi, can you hear me? Thank you very much for taking my question. I was just wondering if you've looked at the connection to estrogen, since outside of COVID, CVST is primarily in women. I wondered if you'd found anything on that. Thank you.
Dr. Strauss, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, you're quite right. CVT as such occurs mainly in younger women, and one of the major risk factors is oral contraception or pregnancy. What we have seen here, according to the experts, is a different clinical picture. It's cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, and it is accompanied very often with thrombocytopenia. So they felt that this is a completely different picture and that there is no way of saying that an oral contraceptive or pregnancy, which is of course not completely opportune at the moment, but is a risk factor for these specific cases that we have observed.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question from Kai Kupferschmidt from Science. Kai, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Two quick questions, if I may. So first of all, the MHRA, when asked about the frequency, said something like 4 in a million. So, around 1 in 250,000. We heard earlier about 1 in 100,000 or thereabouts. Can you give an idea of what the realistic kind of confidence interval is here? Like between what values, would you expect this to end up, given the data you have? And then the other question I just wanted to ask, whether there's any information on how the treatment of these particular side effects has evolved. Do you have any data to suggest that, knowing this possibly HIT-like mechanism has helped avert further deaths? Do you have any data at all on that?
Thanks. Dr. Strauss, please.
First of all, I think what we are talking about is a reporting rate, and that's of course very dependent on how cases are reported, and that's why I again requested that people who think they might experience an adverse event, please report as extensively as possible. So it's not an incidence rate that we can provide at the moment, it's a reporting rate. What we do know is that CVST is rare. At the moment, the most up-to-date estimation of CVST in the background is 1 to 2 per 100,000. So we have here a reporting rate. It varies very much, like I said, with how good the reporting system in a member state is and how good cases are being identified. But what we see is, I think in Germany, a lot of work has been done, and I think there is a reporting rate of 1 in 100,000, and that's what I was referring to. We know that in the UK, the reporting rate is much lower, so that can have many causes. But for the moment, I think it's safe to assume that the reporting rate is around 1 in 100,000. I think in the UK it's 1 in 600,000, but it will be around that figure as a reporting rate. Oh, and the treatment. Yeah. We have discussed that very extensively with the experts, and it's very difficult. It's a difficult entity to treat. What we have heard is that it should be that healthcare professionals should not use heparin if they suspect cases like this until a real hit has been excluded. There might be a possibility to use other anticoagulants, but the scientific opinions are not aligned yet. And other possible treatments involve immunoglobulins and steroids and plasmapheresis. But at the moment, what we recommend is that colleagues look at the guidelines that are available from, for example, the Hematology Society in the UK or other important societies in their own country. But there is no real treatment recommendation yet possible.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question that came through the chat, which I'm going to give to Dr. Arlett. It comes from Loveday Morris from the Washington Post. If it is plausible that this is an immune response, are there any investigations into whether this is also an issue for similar vector vaccines such as J&J and Sputnik? Dr. Alet, please.
Thanks very much. The different vaccines use different technologies, and indeed there are the technology used by the AstraZeneca vaccine is used by others, and of those that are authorised in the EU, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine uses a similar technology based on adenovirus vector. The first thing to say is that during the clinical trials and in the assessment of those clinical trials at the time of authorisation of Johnson & Johnson, there was an early sign of an increased risk of venous thromboembolism, not yet confirmed, but it is in the risk management plan for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. There have been 3 cases with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine of blood clots associated with low platelets, which have some similarities to these cases that we've been describing today, AstraZeneca vaccine. However, the numbers are extremely small compared to the 5 million patients that have been, or vaccinees that have received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine worldwide. This is, however, under close scrutiny. The PRAC is looking at it carefully, and I think it would be fair to say there's intensive monitoring of this issue across the vaccines. I think I would leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have another question in the chat from Aude Le Crubier from Medscape. The question is, I've heard that the way the vaccine is injected could be tied to this rare event, intravenous instead of intramuscular injections. Could you comment on this? Dr. Strauss, please.
Yes, indeed. That has been discussed quite extensively. Of course, the proper administration is intramuscular, but there might be a mistake, and it could be intravenously. But from the experts, we have learned that the amount is so extremely small that that cannot be an explanation events that we have seen.
Thank you. The next question comes from Francien Intema from NOS.
I was wondering, I read in the press release a possible link with the vaccine. In the press release in the Netherlands, I read it as well, but I hear you talking about a side effect. So I want to be very sure. Are we sure there is a causal link or not? And another question, we got these numbers about the cases, and I would like to know if we can divide it up in men and women.
Thank you. Dr. Strauss?
Yeah, thank you. And indeed, sometimes our regulatory way of talking might be a little bit more complicated than it should be. What we have learned from the review of the very detailed review of the cases, that there is a strong association with the AstraZeneca vaccine and the adverse events. And if we add something to 4.8, then that is a sign that we feel that there is a probable causal association between the occurrence of the event and the administration of the vaccine. So that's a bit maybe a language issue where we fail as regulators. So strongly associated is the word I would choose here. And then the second question, I'm not sure that I understood it.
Male or female? Is there the link?
The link for both. Yeah, for both.
The next question comes from Patrizia Antonini from ANSA.
Thank you. Thank you for the floor. I would like to ask you something on Sputnik. I would like to know where you stand on Sputnik assessment right now. If you're launching a probe on ethical problems on trials, if you could give us some details on this. And what will be next vaccine that you will authorize for the European market? What is in the pipeline? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Cook, please.
Yes, thank you very much. And indeed, I think we have announced that we started a rolling review of the Sputnik V vaccine. This means that we're currently looking at the available evidence to see whether it meets the standards we would need for evaluation in the EU. Possibly what you are referring to is that we will be performing good clinical practice inspection in Russia. And this is an evaluation of the way the trials were conducted that allowed the results to be generated. And this is a normal procedure that we follow for many vaccines and medicines, depending on our knowledge of the trials that have been conducted, whether other authorities that we work with have also conducted similar inspections. So it's something that's entirely normal in the context of our evaluation process. Then with respect to the next vaccines that are likely to be authorized, what I can tell you is that in addition to the Sputnik V vaccine, we have 2 other vaccines under rolling review, CureVac vaccine and the Novavax vaccine. And I have not got a crystal ball, so I'm not able to tell you which one of these, of any of the 3, will be first in line. Very much.
Thank you. The next question comes from Anja Ettel-Welt. Anja.
Yes, hello. I hope you can hear me. Thanks for taking my questions.
Yes.
I really have to insist because I still do not understand it, so I'm very sorry. But why did you not recommend use for people under 30, like, for example, as British authorities just have? And what do you expect national authorities throughout the EU to do now? And I would like to repeat the question of one of my colleagues. Could you please divide the 62 cases into age groups and gender? Thanks a lot.
I give the question first to Mrs. Cook, and then perhaps someone else can complement. Yeah. Mrs. Cook, please.
Yes. So thank you very much for this question. Maybe I can mention a couple of things. As previously outlined, the decision on the use of this vaccine is, as described in our packaging information summary of product characteristics, and it outlines all the available information we have about this vaccine, what contraindications and what potential side effects. With respect to limitation to a specific population, this is something that we looked at in a lot of detail through our ad hoc expert group, and the evidence that the available incidences that we had at the time did not allow to draw any causal link between the different gender or age groups. In the UK, I cannot comment on what the decision making in the UK to restrict to a certain age was, but I can tell you there's a lot more use in younger age groups in the UK than there is in the EU at the moment, and we will certainly take this into account in our further evaluations. And sorry, I just wanted to add that we will also be discussing, we have been discussing with the national competent authorities in all our EU countries, and we will have further discussions this evening to discuss the outcomes of today's evaluation and also the impact on possible vaccination strategies in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the next question comes from Jennifer Strasbourg from Wall Street Journal. Jennifer, please.
Hi, thank you. So I still don't understand what you're saying about the.
You need to close your micro, your loudspeaker. There's an echo. Please, thanks. Can you try again? Okay, if that is not working, we are going to take you later. So we take now a question from Naomi O'Leary from the Irish Times. Naomi, please.
Thank you so much for taking my question. Dr. Cook, previously you gave some nice figures on the incidence rate of these rare blood clot events in the various vaccines, and I think it was 4.8 in AstraZeneca, 0.2 in Pfizer-BioNTech, 0 in Moderna, but probably because of its low use. Do you have updated figures and also for Johnson & Johnson? And can you also clarify what those clot cases are? I assume we're talking about CVST and the Splanchik one as well. Thank you.
Thanks. I give this question to Dr. Strauss. She has the updated figures.
Yeah, thank you. For Johnson & Johnson, it was just highlighted that there were 3 cases post-marketing, and I think you mentioned, Dr. Arlett, 4.4 million vaccinated, wasn't it? 4.5 vaccinated, so that's for Johnson & Johnson. For the Comirnaty, we have 35 cases of CVST, and we have an exposure noted at that same moment in time of 4 million. And for Moderna, we have 5 cases of CVST, and we have 4 million vaccinations.
Thank you very much. Dr. Arlett?
Just to complement the data presented by Dr. Strauss, just to mention that the figures on exposure for the Comirnaty, so 54 million, is EEA data, whereas the cases are worldwide cases, the same for Moderna. It's EU exposure, but worldwide cases. I think the other thing that's important to say is that if you look at those reports of blood clots with thrombocytopenia for those other vaccines and then compare them to the background rates we would expect to see, they are not raised.
Thank you very much. We now have a question from Angela Mauro from the Huffington Post.
Yes, thanks for the floor. I wanted to know, you've been saying that people who think they could have side effects, they should report it. Does this mean to recommend these people to ask their national authorities or the physicians to be injected another vaccine and not AstraZeneca? Could this be possible in the amending this? Thank you.
Thank you.
Strauss, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much for that question, because that helps me to clarify. It's a general request because it's very important. The system relies on people providing spontaneous reports of suspected adverse events, and that holds true actually for all medicines. That is very, very important, and more specifically for all vaccines that are being used. So my request was a general request that if people are vaccinated and they experience ADRs or think that they might have adverse events, then please report them. But actually the request is important for all medicines used, because based on spontaneous data and analysis that we do, we can then identify whether or not the observed versus the expected occurrence is higher, and then we can further investigate. So it was a very general request, and in particular for the vaccines, because they are being rolled out in such a large population in a very short period of time. So we are depending on people reporting adverse events, and that doesn't mean anything regarding a specific vaccine at all. So thank you very much for that question and the possibility to further explain.
Thank you very much. We are also now coming almost to a close. I'm going to take one last question from Lyall Liverpool from the New Scientist. Lyall.
Thank you. So I had 2 questions, but, well, I'll just read them out. So firstly, what's the incidence of these rare blood clotting events, specifically among women under 60, and how does that compare to the normal incidence rate among that particular group? And then secondly, is the EMA recommending that countries such as Germany, which have suspended use of the vaccine for specific age groups, should resume use of the vaccine across all age groups? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those 2 questions are for Dr. Strauss, please.
Thank you. The background incidence of the very rare cases of CVST is 1 to 2 per 100,000. What we do have is a reporting incidence. So what we can give is how frequently has the event been reported, and we have the exposure data. And based on that, it's very variable. Like I said, it depends on the way that things are being reported, the way that things are being analyzed in the different member states. And that's how we came up with, because in Germany a lot of work has been done, and it seems that they have a very good reporting of these cases. And there we have a reporting rate of 1 in 100,000, but that doesn't mean the incidence rate. So that's a difference. As for the recommendation, or from what I have understood in Germany, it's that they recommend the AstraZeneca mainly for people above 60, and that if people below that age range would like to have it, it's still possible that they receive the vaccine. What we do here with the PRAC committee, we try to provide as much information as possible on the benefits and on the risks that we have identified, and based on that, the pandemic situation in a member state, the infection rate, the availability of different vaccines, the different member states can take different decisions on who to vaccinate.
Thank you very much. I use this opportunity to thank all our speakers, and I want to thank you for all your questions. Please do not hesitate to take a look at our website. We are providing there quite a lot of information also on the safety monitoring and the evaluation of vaccines. So thank you very much and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.